Imagine two brains side by side glowing with neural activity. One is bathed in a steady warm light, the color of certainty, of safety, of control. The other flickers. Patches of darkness spread across its surface like a slow electrical storm. Neurons misfire in cascading waves. Regions of the brain that handle logic, memory, and self-trust begin to dim, while a tiny almond-shaped core starts to scream with white-hot fury. The first brain belongs to someone who is confident in their own reality. The second brain belongs to someone who has been systematically gaslit. You have never seen the damage, but now you will understand its biology. This is not a metaphor for feeling confused. This is not a description of being upset. This is a map of a neurological attack. What you are about to hear is not opinion. It is hard science pulled from decades of fMRI research, trauma studies, and the emerging field of interpersonal neurobiology. Gaslighting is not an emotional inconvenience. It is a physical process that rewires your brain's most fundamental architecture. The self-doubt you feel is not a character flaw. It is a survival mechanism gone rogue, and the proof is written in your own neural circuitry. Before we dive into the specific regions under assault, we must understand the context. The word gaslighting comes from a 1944 film titled Gaslight, where a husband slowly manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane by dimming the gas lamps in their home and then denying that the light has changed. The psychological mechanism is simple in concept and devastating in practice. One person consistently denies, distorts, or fabricates reality. The victim, trusting the perpetrator, begins to question their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. For decades, this was viewed as a purely psychological phenomenon, a matter of suggestion, of power dynamics, of emotional manipulation. But neuroscience has revealed something far more concrete. Gaslighting does not merely confuse the mind, it physically alters the brain. The first region to break is the prefrontal cortex. This is your brain's CEO. It sits right behind your forehead and is responsible for executive functions, decision-making, impulse control, rational analysis, planning, and the ability to weigh evidence. When you are functioning normally, your prefrontal cortex holds the reins. It looks at incoming information, cross-references it with stored memories, evaluates contradictions, and produces a coherent version of reality. This is the part of your brain that says, "The light changed, I saw it dim, and I trust my eyes." Now imagine what happens when that same signal is met with overwhelming and constant denial. The gaslighter insists the light never changed. They say you are imagining things. They say you are too sensitive, too tired, too dramatic. Your prefrontal cortex tries to reconcile two conflicting inputs. Your sensory data says one thing, the gaslighter says another. The prefrontal cortex does what it was designed to do. It investigates the discrepancy. It searches for more information. It tries to find a logical resolution. But here is the catch. The gaslighter does not present counter-evidence. They present counter-assertion delivered with confidence and repetition. This creates a phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. Your brain hates inconsistency. It will do almost anything to resolve the tension between two contradictory beliefs. When the prefrontal cortex cannot find a logical resolution, it makes a dangerous choice. It begins to devalue your own sensory data. It literally reduces the neural weight of your own perceptions. This is not a conscious decision. It is a biological shortcut. The brain says, if accepting my own eyes means constant conflict, it is easier to stop trusting my eyes. The result is a progressive shutdown of the prefrontal cortex under chronic stress. We know this from fMRI studies on decision-making under duress. When cortisol levels remain elevated for extended periods, the prefrontal cortex's neural connectivity begins to erode. Synaptic connections that once fired with speed and confidence become sluggish. Dendritic branches, the tiny receivers that allow neurons to communicate, actually retract. The CEO is slowly being starved of its resources. Energy is diverted away from rational analysis and toward more primitive survival systems. The gaslit individual begins to freeze when asked simple questions. They cannot make decisions. They second-guess every conclusion. They feel stupid. They feel slow. But the truth is, their brain is conserving energy, pulling power away from the executive center because it has learned that logic does not win. This brings us to the second battleground, the amygdala. This small, almond-shaped cluster of nuclei deep in the temporal lobe is your brain's smoke detector. Its primary job is to scan for threats. Not just physical threats like a predator in the bushes, but social threats. Rejection, humiliation, betrayal, loss of attachment. To the amygdala, these are existential dangers. In a healthy brain, the amygdala sends out a warning signal. The prefrontal cortex evaluates the threat, decides whether it is real, and either confirms the alarm or tells the amygdala to stand down. But as we just saw, the prefrontal cortex is compromised. Gaslighting is a continuous trigger for the amygdala. Every time the victim is told they are wrong about their own reality, the amygdala registers a social threat. Your partner, your boss, your parent, the person you rely on for safety is telling you that your mind is broken. To the amygdala, this is not just an argument. It is a survival crisis. Humans are social animals. Our ancestors depended on the tribe for protection. Being cast out, being doubted, being judged as unreliable could mean death. So the amygdala responds with proportional intensity. Over time, the amygdala becomes sensitized. It begins to fire at lower and lower thresholds. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a pause before an answer, any of these can trigger a full stress response. The amygdala hijacks the brain. It floods the system with cortisol and adrenaline. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, the stomach clenches. The victim enters a state of hypervigilance. They are not overreacting. Their amygdala has been trained to see threats everywhere because the threat was everywhere. This state of chronic amygdala activation has a specific name in neuroscience. It is called kindling. Originally discovered in epilepsy research, kindling refers to the process by which repeated subthreshold stimulation makes a neural circuit more excitable over time. The first time the gaslighter leaves the victim in a state of confusion, the amygdala fires but eventually calms down. The 10th time, the amygdala fires faster and stays active longer. The 100th time, the amygdala is on standby, waiting to ignite at the slightest hint of instability. The victim lives in a permanent low-grade emergency. They are not weak. They are neurologically primed for defense. Now we arrive at the most insidious target, the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped structure is your brain's librarian. It encodes new memories, consolidates short-term experiences into long-term storage, and crucially, it places memories in their correct emotional and temporal context. The hippocampus is what allows you to say, "I remember that conversation clearly. It happened at 8 p.m. I was standing in the kitchen. I felt confused." The hippocampus gives your memories a timestamp and a location and a feeling. Cortisol is toxic to the hippocampus, not metaphorically toxic, biochemically toxic. The hippocampus is packed with cortisol receptors, more than almost any other brain region. When the amygdala has been triggering constant stress responses, the hippocampus is bathed in cortisol day after day. This does two things. First, it impairs the encoding of new memories. The gaslit individual begins to have trouble remembering the details of conversations that happened just hours ago. They walk out of a room and cannot recall exactly what was said. They start to rely on notes, on recordings, on any external anchor because their internal librarian is swamped by the stress hormones. Second, and more devastating, chronic cortisol exposure can physically shrink the hippocampus. This is not speculation. Long-term depression, PTSD, and chronic emotional abuse all correlate with measurable hippocampal volume loss. When a gaslighter says, "You never said that, you are remembering it wrong, you are making things up," they are not just manipulating you verbally. They are exploiting the biological vulnerability of the hippocampus. The victim genuinely cannot access the memory with the same clarity they once could. The gaslighter denies reality, and the victim's hippocampus, under assault, cannot provide the evidence needed to defend it. This creates a catastrophic feedback loop. The victim enters a conversation with partial or fragmented memories. They know something is wrong, but they cannot articulate it. The gaslighter, sensing the hesitation, doubles down. The victim tries harder to remember. Stress spikes. More cortisol floods the hippocampus. More memory encoding is disrupted. More neural connections weaken. The victim becomes more confused. They start to believe the gaslighter, not because they have been convinced, but because their own evidence has been erased from the hard drive. This is not a lie that the victim is telling themselves. It is a biological truth written in oxygen-deprived tissue. But here is the part that changes everything. The brain is not static. It is not a computer with soldered circuits. It is a living, breathing organ that changes in response to experience. This is neuroplasticity, and it cuts both ways. The same mechanism that allows gaslighting to damage the brain also allows the brain to heal. The prefrontal cortex, starved and weakened, can be rebuilt. The amygdala, kindled and hypervigilant, can be calmed. The hippocampus, shrunken and depleted, can generate new neurons. The process of recovery is not abstract, it is structural. The first step is physical removal from the source of the gaslighting. The brain cannot heal while it is being actively poisoned. Just as a wound cannot close if you keep tearing the stitches, the hippocampus cannot regenerate if cortisol levels remain elevated. This is why the single most important intervention is distance. It takes weeks for the body to downregulate the stress response after the threat is removed. The amygdala needs time to unlearn its hypersensitivity. This requires consistent safety, the absence of contradiction, the presence of validation. The second step is deliberate cognitive exercise. The prefrontal cortex can be strengthened through structured decision-making. Small, low-stakes choices that reaffirm the brain's ability to evaluate reality. What do I want for breakfast? What color is the sky? The gaslit brain has lost the habit of trusting its own observations. It must be retrained neuron by neuron to trust input from the senses again. This feels ridiculous at first. It feels like a child learning to walk, but that is exactly what it is. The neural pathways for self-trust have been pruned away, they must be grown back. The third step is memory reconstruction. This does not mean forcing yourself to remember traumatic events in excruciating detail. That can actually re-traumatize the hippocampus. Instead, recovery involves building new, clear, uncomplicated memories. Memories that are not contested. Memories that are witnessed and confirmed. Each time you remember a conversation accurately and have that accuracy mirrored back to you, your hippocampus strengthens its ability to encode truth. Each moment of validation is like watering a dried seed. You are not recovering the past, you are rebuilding the neural architecture for the future. There's a reason we talk about brain chemistry when we talk about love, addiction, and depression. There's a reason we understand that serotonin levels affect mood and dopamine affects motivation. We have accepted that the brain is the organ of experience. But somehow, when it comes to psychological manipulation, we still default to the language of blame. We say the victim is too sensitive. We say they should just stand up for themselves. We say they should get over it. This is not just unhelpful, it is biologically illiterate. You are not confused because you are weak. You are confused because your prefrontal cortex was systematically starved of the oxygen of logical consistency. You are not afraid because you are paranoid. You are afraid because your amygdala was kindled into hypervigilance by a threat that was real day after day. You cannot remember the details because your hippocampus was under chemical siege. Your confusion is not a character flaw. It is a biological signature of surviving a specific kind of assault on your reality. The next time someone tries to dismiss your experience by saying you are overthinking, you are too emotional, or you are remembering it wrong, remember that there is a part of your brain that knows the truth. It is buried under cortisol, under synaptic pruning, under the layers of neural rewiring that were forced upon you, but it is still there, and you can rebuild the connection to it. The brain that was shaped by gaslighting can be reshaped by truth, one clear perception at a time. One calm decision at a time, one validated memory at a time. The circuitry of self-doubt is not your destiny. It is a pattern, and patterns can be changed.